The sea has many voices. On a calm day it whispers with the lap of waves and the cry of gulls. But on the night of October 14th, 1939, the voice of the North Sea was a thunderclap that shattered the peace of a nation and birthed a legend so audacious, so tactically brilliant, and so shrouded in enigma that it remains one of the most startling episodes of the Second World War. This is the story of a single torpedo, a ghostly hunter, and the pride of the Royal Navy sent to the abyss in a heartbeat. Our tale begins not in the dark waters off the Scottish coast, but in the tense, charged atmosphere of the Kriegsmarine's High Command in Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Just weeks into the war, the German WWII arm, under the command of Karl Dönitz, was eager to prove its worth. The U-boat captains were a new breed of warrior. They fought not on the rolling decks of battleships, but in the silent, claustrophobic world beneath the waves. Among them was Captain Lieutenant Gunther Prien, a young, intense, and fiercely determined officer. His command was U-47*, a Type WWII submarine, a vessel that was to become both his sword and his shroud. Prien was given a mission that many considered suicidal. British intelligence believed the anchorage at Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands to be impregnable. This vast natural harbor was the home of the Royal Navy's home fleet, protected by tidal races, treacherous currents, sunken block ships, anti-submarine nets, and patrol boats. It was here that the mighty German fleet had scuttled itself at the end of the First World War, and the British were certain its defenses were now unassailable. They were wrong. Dönitz had pored over old charts and aerial photographs. He found a weakness, a narrow, poorly blocked eastern entrance known as Kirk Sound. On the evening of October 13, 1939, U-47* slipped beneath the cold, gray waves of the North Sea, running silent and deep. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with diesel fumes, sweat, and a palpable tension. The crew, 44 men in total, moved with a quiet purpose, their voices hushed. Prien addressed them, his voice calm but firm. "We have a difficult task ahead," he said. "We are going into Scapa Flow." A stunned silence followed. Every man knew the reputation of that place. It was a death trap. The journey through Kirk Sound was a nightmare of navigation. Prien had to surface to negotiate the gap, his submarine perilously exposed in the ghostly light of the aurora borealis. At one point, the current caught U-47* and swung her sideways, her hull scraping against the rusting carcass of a sunken block ship. On the bridge, Prien and his watch officer held their breath, certain the screech of metal would alert the shore defenses. But no alarm was raised. The British, in their hubris, were asleep. By midnight on October 14th, U-47* was inside the lair, but to Prien's dismay, the main anchorage seemed almost empty. Had the fleet sailed? Had the entire daring mission been for nothing? He scanned the dark silhouette of the shore through his periscope, then he saw them. Not the massive lines of battleships he expected, but two large vessels nestled against the far shore. One was identified as a battleship of the Revenge class. The other was older, a seaplane tender. It was a bitter disappointment, but a target was a target. Prien began to set up his attack. He gave the order to make ready 3 torpedo tubes in the bow. The crew worked with silent efficiency, the only sounds the click of switches and the hiss of compressed air. "Tube 1, ready. Tube 2, ready." "Tube 3, ready," came the reports. Prien peered through the periscope. "Firing point procedure. Stand by. Fire 1." A shudder ran through the boat as the first torpedo shot out into the dark water. "Fire 2." Another shudder. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute, nothing, then a loud clang and a dull thud. One of the torpedoes had hit the anchor chain of the supposed battleship, its magnetic detonator failing to trigger. The other had simply missed or malfunctioned. Panic began to set in aboard U-47*. They were inside the enemy's strongest fortress, their presence potentially revealed, and their weapons had failed them. "Reload the bow tubes," Prien barked, his voice tight. The crew scrambled in the cramped space, manhandling the heavy torpedoes into place. This was their last chance. Prien decided to use a different tactic, switching to impact pistols on the torpedoes instead of the unreliable magnetic ones. He turned U-47 around to bring his stern tubes to bear. It was a risky maneuver, but he had no choice. He took one last look through the periscope. The two ships were still there, unaware. He lined up his shot again. "Stern tubes, ready, fire!" Two more torpedoes streaked away into the night. This time, the wait was rewarded. At 1:16 a.m., a brilliant orange flash illuminated the night, followed seconds later by the deep rolling boom of an explosion, then another, even more violent. A column of water and fire erupted amidships on the larger vessel. Prien, watching through the periscope, saw a sight that would be seared into his memory. "She is breaking apart," he exclaimed. He didn't wait to see more. "Alarm! Dive, 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 take her down hard! Full speed ahead!" U-47 plunged into the depths, as behind her, the Royal Navy's pride, HMS Royal Oak, began her death plunge. The reality of what Prien had targeted was the first layer of the mystery. The ship he identified as a Revenge-class battleship was, in fact, the Royal Oak, but the other ship, the one he thought was a seaplane tender, was the aging seaplane carrier, HMS Pegasus. However, for decades, a compelling and controversial theory has persisted. Was there a third, hidden ship in Scapa Flow that night? A ship whose existence and destruction were so embarrassing, so strategically devastating, that the British Admiralty buried the truth forever. The official story is that U-47 sank only the Royal Oak, with the loss of 833 men. It was a terrible tragedy, but a straightforward one. The Royal Oak was an old battleship, slow, and considered a secondary unit. But what if the second ship Prien saw and attacked was not the Pegasus at all? What if it was HMS Hood? Now, the HMS Hood was no ordinary warship. She was the pride of the entire British Empire, the largest and most powerful warship in the world for 2 decades. She was known as the Mighty Hood, a symbol of British naval supremacy. To have the Hood sunk, not in a grand fleet battle, but sneak attacked at anchor in her own home port, would have been a psychological blow from which British morale might never have recovered. The official records state the Hood was elsewhere at the time, but the fog of war and the propensity for wartime propaganda leaves room for doubt. Let us examine the facts that fuel this theory. Survivors from the Royal Oak reported multiple, powerful explosions. Some described 2 distinct sets of blasts, separated by several minutes as if 2 different sets of torpedoes had struck. More intriguingly, some crewmen reported seeing, in the glare of the explosions, the distinct, massive silhouette of a battlecruiser, not the smaller profile of the Pegasus. One survivor, a young stoker who escaped the sinking ship, later swore in an interview, "It weren't the Pegasus over there. I'd served on her. That silhouette was too long, too tall. It was the Hood. I'd bet my life on it." Furthermore, the damage to the Royal Oak was catastrophic, but the forensic analysis suggested a ferocity of explosion that some experts argue could only be explained if her magazine had been detonated by a secondary external source perhaps, a nearby ship's fuel oil or munitions cooking off. If the Hood, with her massive magazines, had been hit, the sympathetic explosion could have been mistaken for the Royal Oak's own demise. The most compelling piece of circumstantial evidence, however, concerns the Hood's own timeline. Officially, she was in the North Atlantic on convoy duty, but naval movements were state secrets. Could her logs have been falsified? After the war, when Gunther Prien was debriefed, before his death in 1941, he remained adamant that the second ship he targeted was larger than a seaplane tender. He even amended his initial log entry. He wrote, "I saw the Royal Oak sink, and next to it another, larger warship listing heavily. I am certain it was a battlecruiser." The British Admiralty, of course, vehemently denied this. To admit the Hood was sunk in such a manner would have been a disaster. It was far better for public morale to let the world believe the Royal Oak, an older vessel, was the sole victim, and to let the legend of the Mighty Hood live on until her very public and tragic demise in the Battle of the Denmark Strait a year and a half later. But what if that later sinking was a carefully staged event to explain the loss of a ship that had already been destroyed? A conspiracy of silence, involving hundreds of men, seems impossible to maintain. Yet the sheer scale of the Royal Oak cover up the immediate sealing of records, the swift burial of the dead in a common grave. The silencing of survivors suggests the Admiralty had something very big to hide. The aftermath of the attack was a study in contrasts. In Germany, Gunther Prien and his crew were hailed as national heroes. They were flown to Berlin, where Adolf Hitler himself awarded Prien the Knight's Cross. They were the living proof of German ingenuity and daring. Propaganda films celebrated the raid, and Prien became known as the Bull of Scapa Flow, his boat's conning tower soon adorned with a snorting bull emblem. In Britain, it was a different story. The shock and humiliation were profound. The First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, was forced to stand in Parliament and explain how a U-boat had penetrated the Royal Navy's most secure base. An immediate inquiry was launched, and the defenses of Scapa Flow were drastically improved. But behind the public outrage, there was a frantic, secret effort to control the narrative. The specific details of the sinking were classified for decades. The human cost was immense. Of the 1,234 men aboard the Royal Oak, 833 perished, many of them boy sailors, some as young as 15, trapped in the dark, freezing water or inside the rapidly capsizing hull. Their bodies were later recovered and buried in a common cemetery on the Orkney Islands, a silent, poignant testament to the night's horror.